It's great to see everybody. Oh, Sandy, it's so nice to see your face. It's been a little while. So great to see you. So this is our monthly speaker series, and in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to our president, Linnell Filmon, to introduce our speaker. A lot of great interest in this month. But before we do that, allow me to go over just a couple of reminders in terms of Zoom etiquette, since we are still on Zoom. So please stay muted during the presentation. You can control that from the control bar of your Zoom. You can raise your hand or use the chat feature to ask a question or make a comment. And at the end of our speaker's remarks, Linnell and I will help facilitate making sure that all those questions are seen and have a chance to get answered. And I'm going to save that next slide for Linnell's announcements at the end, but with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Linnell.
All right, Deb, I was just letting some folks into the waiting room, so if you would keep an eye on that. I'm glad to see more people are joining us. So good afternoon. As Deb said, I am Linnell Filmon, the president for League of Women Voters here in Jacksonville on the First Coast. And it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker today. So Chris Hand is a Jacksonville native with a long record of public, civic, and legal service. He currently leads Hand Law, a Florida strategic government law firm, which helps clients navigate the often complex process of working with public agencies. You ain't kidding. The firm provides strategic counsel and litigation advocacy to help businesses, other organizations, and individuals seek opportunities and solve challenges with government. Specific practice areas include government contracts, infrastructure, economic development, procurement, local government counsel, and our favorite, election law. From 2011 to 2015, Mr. Hand served as Chief of Staff at the City of Jacksonville here in Florida, the largest city by area in the contiguous United States, 12th largest by population in the nation, and most populated city in the state of Florida. As Chief of Staff, he led the advancement of strategic initiatives, coordinated Mayor Alvin Brown's cabinet of direct reports, and managed the mayor's office team with oversight for policy, advocacy, communications, outreach, and scheduling. Mr. Hand also led efforts to achieve retirement reform and participated in economic development and downtown Jacksonville revitalization initiatives, something that continues today. Mr. Hand has been engaged with federal and state government. From 1996 to 2000, he served as speechwriter, campaign press secretary, and Senate press secretary for U.S. Senator and former Governor Bob Graham. With Senator Graham, he is the co-author of America, the Owner's Manual, You Can Fight City Hall and Win, a guide to helping Americans flex their citizenship muscles to make government respond. In 2008, Mr. Hand served as one of 27 Florida electors in the Electoral College. Mr. Hand helped to lead the bipartisan Groveland 4 Clemency Coalition, which worked to persuade the Florida cabinet to pardon 4 Floridians unjustly accused of crimes. The cabinet unanimously approved pardons on January 11, 2019. And on November 22, 2021, Florida's 5th Judicial Circuit Court restored the legal innocence of the Groveland 4. Mr. Hand graduated from Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. He was honored with the Daily Princetonian, if I'm saying that right, sir, award for efforts to reform the university's then century-old honor code. Mr. Hand later graduated from the University of Florida's Levin College of Law. A law school student body elected him as president of the Student Bar Association. He has also served as a research assistant to former Florida Governor Buddy McKay and was a member of the moot court team. He's an enthusiastic hiker who loves the outdoors, and he currently lives in Jacksonville with his wife and 2 children. And with that, Mr. Hand, I turn the Zoom floor over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Linnell, for that very kind introduction. And it is really great to be with all of you today. As I was mentioning to Linnell kind of prior to the call, the League of Women Voters has a very special place in my heart. One of my first interactions with citizen engagement and with politics in general came when I was very young. My mother was an active member of the League of Women Voters chapter here in Jacksonville. So I've had a lifelong sense of the great work the League of Women Voters does, the many years of leadership it's provided. to protect our democracy and elevate the public dialogue in our country. So I'm just very grateful for all of you and how active and effective and engaged of citizens you are here in our community and beyond that. Also want to say thanks to Laura Strickland, who is the director of the speaker series, for the very thoughtful invitation to be here today. I also wanted to say hello. I saw that two really good friends of mine, outstanding public servants, people I had the great opportunity to work with when I was at the city of Jacksonville, Carla Miller and Kirby Obrador are on the call today. Always great to see them. For those of you who aren't already aware, Carla and Kirby are the past and now current director of the City of Jacksonville Office of Ethics, Compliance, and Oversight, really doing remarkable work in our local government. And I had the great privilege to work with both of them when I was at City Hall. So just great to see all of you today. I hope everybody here is safe and well after what has been a very challenging 22 months. When Laura and I originally started talking about setting up this appearance, the whole plan was to do this obviously in person. We're very excited, hopefully, that COVID was going to be more in the rearview mirror, and we might be able to get back to doing some in-person events. Obviously, Omicron had very different ideas and, some very concerning numbers right here in the state of Florida right now. I was kind of looking this up last night, as I do about once a week, and here in Florida, the number of COVID-19 cases has increased by about 1,000% over the last 2 weeks, and that's nearly 1,400%, 1,400% here in Jacksonville, Duval County. Statewide, there were 85,000 new cases over the weekend, and COVID-19 hospitalizations have doubled over the last week. So obviously a concerning time. We hope everybody's safe and well, that many people will make sure they're protected in every way they can be from this, and that all of you stay safe and well throughout this period. I wanted to talk today, as the title of the speech indicates, about effective citizenship, and that's obviously a concept that is not remotely foreign to anyone in the League of Women Voters, because I think the League, is just one of the premier organizations in our country that encourages effective citizenship. But I want to talk a little bit today, and I'm going to hopefully be able to do this successfully. I'm going to try and share my screen. So let me do that. And because I've got a little bit of a presentation that I want to share with you today. And if anybody can't see the screen, please let me know. Just by way of introduction, I'm not going to really kind of get deeply into the book, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is a book that Senator Bob Graham and I wrote in 2016. And I've spoken to some other League chapters around the state and the statewide convention a couple of years ago about this book, America, the Owner's Manual, You Can Fight City Hall and Win. And the book is an effort to kind of help citizens develop what we think are the 10 most vital effective citizenship skills to move government in their direction. In the book, we also talk about the stories of Americans who have used those effective citizenship skills to persuade government to move in their direction. And I'll be using some of those stories today, but just kind of wanted to orient you a little bit as we get going. I want to start with a premise that I suspect everybody on this call agrees with, and that's that each of us holds the most important title in American democracy. And when I say that to groups sometimes, there's automatically some thinking, what is he talking about? I'm not president, I'm not a governor, I'm not a senator or a congressperson. Well, the truth is you don't have to be, because the most important title in American democracy is that of citizen. Former Illinois governor and two-time presidential candidate, former United Nations ambassador, Adlai Stevenson really said it best when he said that as citizens in a democracy, you are the rulers and the ruled, the lawgivers and the law-abiding, the beginning and the end. But as everybody here knows well, it's not enough to have the title. We have to build and flex our citizenship muscles to make government respond. And as everybody here probably has a pretty good sense, that's the challenge. Most Americans no longer think that we can make government respond. Pew Research Center, which is a terrific resource, by the way, for those of you who don't follow it, I think it's just full of lots of great information. But in 2020, they did one of their periodic surveys they do every few years. and found that more than 70% of Americans believe that most officials don't care what people like me think. And as you can imagine, those feelings of alienation and frustration are completely understandable, primarily because of what's happened in Washington and in state capitals around the country in recent years, and because we haven't been trained to know we have the skills to make government care what we think. And this is a subject I know is near and dear to the League of Women Voters' heart because of your kind of focus on civic education. So, I mean, how did we get here? Well, we got here because for decades, civics and citizenship have largely been absent from the American curriculum. My co-author, Senator Graham, likes to talk about the fact that when he was at Miami Senior High School in the late 1950s, he had 3 full one-year courses on civics as part of the curriculum there. Well, 10, 20 years later, by the 1960s, 1970s, civics had largely disappeared from the curriculum. And where we have taught civics, it has sometimes lacked a key component. In other words, we've sometimes taught it as spectator citizenship as opposed to participatory citizenship. Spectator citizenship being the branches of, what the cabinet agencies are, what are the 3 branches of government, what does the Constitution say, as opposed to how do we use the citizenship skills we have to make sure that government is responsive to our needs and concerns. The analogy that we often use is, imagine if you were teaching somebody the game of basketball. Would you teach them how to play basketball by going into the locker room and having people read books about the history of basketball, or maybe showing them videos of other people playing basketball? Or would you take them out on the court and teach them how to shoot and pass and dribble? Well, for years in this country, we've been teaching civics in that locker room style. And as a result, it hasn't been effective. Obviously, as citizens, we don't want to sit in the stands of democracy watching it happen. We want to be on the court of democracy making it happen. And so what I'd like to start with today is sharing with you the stories of 4 different Americans who made the decision to be in the arena of democracy on the court and make it happen, and were successful in doing so. And then in that process, I'd love to dispel some myths and provide some truths about effective citizenship. So let me start, and just forgive me as I work with technology a little bit here, but let me start with the first couple of people I'd like to introduce you to. There's a great myth, and particularly in this day and age, in such a period of partisanship and polarization, that we simply can't work together, that it's impossible to bridge ideological divides or impossible to bridge partisan divides. But the truth is that we still can work together to achieve common goals. And to help illustrate that, I'd like to introduce you to 2 people from the state of Georgia who are in the photo that's on the screen right now. And that's Debbie Dooley and Colleen Kiernan. So just to give you a little bit of sense of how differently Debbie and Colleen approach these issues. Debbie was one of the 13 founders of the National Tea Party and the founder of the Georgia Tea Party. Colleen, at the time they met, was the executive director of the Georgia Sierra Club. Now just think about that for 1 second. Tea Party and Sierra Club, 2 groups that you don't think of working together very often. But several years ago, Debbie and Colleen had a chance meeting on the steps of the Georgia Capitol. They're pictured there at a later meeting on the Georgia Capitol, but had a chance meeting on the Georgia Capitol. And as they got to know each other, they realized they had some goals and interests in common. For example, one of the first projects they worked together on is they were both opposed to an additional sales tax the state of Georgia wanted to, or their part of Georgia wanted to levy to help with some transportation needs. They had different concerns about it, but were united in their opposition. As they continued to work together, they learned they had an equal passion for the issue of solar power, and both were big advocates of solar power. So Debbie and some of her allies, and Colleen and some of hers, got together with some solar power advocates in the state of Florida, and they formed the very aptly named Green Tea Coalition. And the goal of the Green Tea Coalition was to increase Georgia's use of solar power. Now, early on in that process, they had some pretty staunch opposition. One of the main opponents early on, and I want to stress early on, and I'll get back to that in a minute, was Georgia's very large investor-owned utility, Georgia Power, which had a ton of political influence in the state. But Debbie and Colleen, working as part of this Green Tea Coalition, managed to persuade legislators in Georgia to make it easier for people to have solar devices on their homes. They managed to persuade the Georgia Public Service Commission, which is their regulatory entity in Georgia for regulating utilities, to require utilities, not just Georgia Power, but there are other utilities in the state, to include solar energy as part of their energy mix there in Georgia. As a result, they were so successful, not only in persuading regulators and legislators, they were so successful, they even managed to persuade some of their prior opponents, like Georgia Power, to embrace solar energy. And as a result now, Georgia Power has solar energy facilities throughout the state of Georgia, including on Fort Stewart, outside of Savannah, on or near Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base, just north of Jacksonville, in the Brunswick area, even on the campus of the University of Georgia, and also on some land that former President Jimmy Carter donated in Southwest Georgia near his home of Plains. Debbie and Colleen were so effective in working together and through the Green Tea Coalition that for many years I used to say that while Florida was the Sunshine State in name, Georgia was the Sunshine State in fact. Florida's caught up to some extent, which is good. But that is all because these two people met in this chance meeting on the steps of the Georgia Capitol, realized that despite all of their differences, they had a lot in common and were able to have a game-changing success in making Georgia a pro-solar power state, so that we can still work together, even in these polarized times. Another myth that I hear a lot as we talk about citizen engagement is, and let me move to our next screen, is the myth that, you know, one person can't make a difference. I hear that question a lot. I'm just one person. What can I do to change the course of event or to persuade government? Well, the truth is that even one person can make a difference. And to kind of help introduce you to and remind you why that's possible, I'd like to move from Georgia, where we were with Debbie and Colleen, and move to Miami Beach. Many of you have probably spent time in Miami Beach, also known as South Beach. So you're familiar with the historic, iconoclastic Art Deco infrastructure that is featured in Miami Beach. It's really sort of one of its signature qualities. People from around the world, that's one of the first things they mention when they talk about Miami Beach. Well, that infrastructure is there because one person decided to make a difference. And that person's name was Barbara Capetman. So just to kind of set the stage for you a little bit, in the 1970s, early 1980s, some of you probably know that Walt Disney World just celebrated its 50th anniversary on October 1st of last year. Well, Disney coming to Florida had a huge impact, not just on Central Florida, but on other parts of Florida that were very concerned that they were going to fall behind as a result of this, you know, this new addition to Florida. And so communities were looking at ways to kind of hold their market share of tourism. And in Miami Beach, there was a plan in place that was advanced by some city government officials and a variety of developers and others to build a large entertainment zone in Miami Beach that would have wiped out a lot of the Art Deco architecture that was there. Well, one person decided that she was not having any of that. And that was a recently widowed historic preservationist named Barbara Capetman. And over the next several years, she was exceptionally effective in working with every level of government, at the local government level, trying to elect pro-preservation candidates, at the state government level, trying to build alliances and relationships with the State Office of Historic Preservation, which she was able to do. And then ultimately, at the federal level, convincing the federal government to turn the Art Deco parts of South Beach into a national district of historic preservation. It's on the National Historic Register there, which provides it some protection. And now, many years later, if you go to South Beach, Barbara has passed on. In fact, she passed away shortly before the federal government, put it on the National Register of Historic Places. But she's still keeping watch. If you go to next time you go to Miami Beach, you'll find this statue of Barbara keeping watch over the Art Deco district that she created, and through the organization she created, the Miami Design Preservation League, which is still very active in South Beach. In fact, its main focus today is trying to protect the Art Deco structures, not from development or from local government officials, but from climate change and sea level rise, which is a huge issue. So even though she's gone, that one person continues to make a difference to the organization that she founded, still to this day, trying to protect those signature Art Deco structures. So another myth I hear a lot is that the system always wins. There's nothing I can do. Ultimately, if you just give it enough time, the system will win. People will get tired and they'll stop making their effective citizenship efforts. And the truth is that perseverance and persistence really pay off if you stick with it and keep the faith. And so to kind of talk about that concept, I want to move a little bit in Florida from South Beach up to Central Florida. And I want to introduce you. I wish she was here today in person so I could introduce you, but I want to introduce you virtually to my friend, Carol Greenlee. Some of you may be familiar with the story of the Groveland Four. And if you're not, allow me to just kind of give a brief synopsis here. But in July of 1949, now almost 73 years ago, a grave injustice occurred in Lake County, Florida, just north of Orlando. Four men, Charles Greenlee, Samuel Shepard, Ernest Thomas, and Walter Irvin, were arrested for a crime they didn't commit. They were falsely charged with rape in Lake County, just north of Orlando. It was a horrific example of law enforcement and judicial misconduct and prosecutorial misconduct. At the time, Lake County was controlled by a very powerful sheriff named Willis McCall, who really ruled the county and essentially attempted to round up these four men and 10 on them a crime that did not occur. Just to give you a sense of just how horrific this situation it was, three of the men were taken into custody. That's Charles Greenlee, Samuel Shepard, Walter Irvin, subjected to torture and other abuses while in prison. The fourth man, Ernest Thomas, recognizing what was happening, tried to flee the jurisdiction after he was accused of the crime. Sheriff Willis McCall essentially sent out what amounted to a mob of white citizens who hunted down Mr. Thomas and murdered him in cold blood. The other three all had trials in front of an all-white jury in Lake County. Charles Greenlee, because he was 16 at the time, he was a minor, was given life in prison. Samuel Shepard and Ernest Thomas were convicted, sentenced to death. They were represented by Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in their appeal, in their trial, and also their appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court in the early 1950s overturned the verdicts against Samuel Shepard and Walter Irvin. In fact, writing for the majority, Justice Robert Jackson described the case as one of the best examples of one of the worst menaces to American justice. Overturned their conviction. After their conviction was overturned, Sheriff McCall came to Rayford to pick up Mr. Shepard and Mr. Irvin. And on the way back to Lake County, he pulled the car over to the side of the road, let them out, and then attempted to murder them. He was successful in killing Samuel Shepard. He was not successful in killing Walter Irvin, who was able to live and tell his story to the FBI. Walter Irvin was subsequently found guilty again with another all-white jury and sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to life in prison by then Governor Leroy Collins here in Florida, and he died shortly after he was released from prison in the late 1960s. It's a horrific story, one of the worst abuses in Florida. If you're not familiar with it and would like to learn more, I would commend to you a really brilliant and moving work written by Gilbert King, who's become a really good friend of mine, called Devil in the Grove, Thurgood Marshall, the Groveland Boys, and the Dawn of a New America. Gilbert really tells the story and the injustices that happened to the Groveland Four and the breakdown in both the judicial, prosecutorial, and law enforcement systems. Going back to Charles Greenlee, as I told you, he was 16 at the time that he was arrested, and he had just come to Groveland, Florida, trying to find better work because he had a child on the way. And that child was Carol Greenlee, who you see on the screen in front of me. Carol was born in the fall of 1949, just a few months after her father was wrongly incarcerated. And she met him for the first time several years later when he was unjustly imprisoned at Rayford. And he finally was released from prison in the early 1960s. Carol has worked her entire life, all 72 years. She just turned 72 on November 11th of 2021. She's worked her entire life to clear her father's name, and other Groveland Four family members have also spent the last 7 decades trying to clear the names of their family members. And for many years, there was very little movement in this case, and things began to change about 10 years ago. As I mentioned earlier, Gilbert published Devil in the Grove in 2012, which brought a lot of awareness to this cause throughout Florida and around the country, and attracted the attention of a bunch of Florida legislators and Florida citizens. There was a young man who was a student at the University of Florida named Josh Venkataraman. Josh now works in the media production space in Los Angeles, but he was a student at UF, and he read Devil in the Grove, was very moved and concerned about what happened, so started an online petition to seek justice and received a huge response. Like I said, others took notice of the story and efforts that people like Josh made, and there began to be some movement in this case. Both the town of Groveland in Lake County and Lake County itself issued apologies to the Groveland Four members. The Florida legislature, led by Geraldine Thompson from the Orlando area and Gary Farmer and Bobby DuBose from the Broward County area, led an effort. And in 2017, the legislature did something that it never does. It acted unanimously and unanimously apologized to the Groveland Four families for the injustice that had been done to them, and also recommended that the Florida Board of Executive Clemency, which in our state is the cabinet, they are one and the same, recommended that they issue a posthumous pardon to the Groveland Four. Well, that was in 2017. Nothing much happened after that. I was very fortunate to be able to kind of get involved, read the book, and through some of the work I do with some classmates from my Leadership Florida class, we were fortunate enough to be able to get involved and sort of help help put together this Groveland Four Clemency Coalition and begin working with the families to advance these final stages of justice. On January 11th, 2019, the Florida cabinet, it was their first cabinet meeting of the new cabinet, but sitting as the Board of Executive Clemency, they issued a unanimous posthumous pardon of the Groveland Four. And that was a wonderful occasion. But, you know, a pardon is different from an exoneration. You know, what ultimately Carol wanted, and some of the other Groveland Four family members wanted, was an exoneration. They wanted, you know, for their family members, and in Carol's case, her father, to be innocent in the eyes of the law, to be legally innocent. And so at the time the pardons were happening, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement started an investigation into the possibility of exoneration. They were somewhat delayed, probably because of COVID, but they finished their final report in the late spring, early summer of 2021, and forwarded that report to the state attorney for the 5th Judicial Circuit of Florida, which includes Lake County. And it really brought this case full circle. because the case had started with law enforcement and prosecutorial misconduct that you can read more about in Gilbert's book in terms of how the cases were tried and these men were framed. But in a fitting case of bringing it full circle, like I said, the report landed on the desk of a gentleman named Bill Gladson. Bill, who is the state attorney for the Fifth Judicial Circuit, a brilliant individual and someone who I think, like all the best prosecutors, views himself as a minister of justice in the broadest sense of the word, not just to prosecute lawbreakers, which is certainly his job, but also to achieve justice in every other way that it's required. And Bill saw an injustice here, did exhaustive research, managed to find evidence that had been missing for decades, and with that evidence was able to file a motion in October of this year to set aside the verdicts against the Groveland Four members who were unjustly convicted and dismiss indictments against those where verdicts had not kind of ultimately set in or had been previously overturned. And on Monday, November 22nd, 2021, we all had the privilege to be in the Lake County Courthouse where the circuit court granted State Attorney Gladson's motion, and for the first time in more than 72 years, restored the legal innocence of the Groveland Four. And that was because this one person, and this is a picture of Carol at the moment. I'm sorry, I'm going to try and hold this together. But at the moment, the judge handed down her and read her ruling from the bench. This is a picture of Carol from that moment. This is someone who devoted her entire life to being an effective citizen and to making sure that this wrong against her father and the other members of the Groveland Four was righted. That is the definition of citizen persistence and perseverance. Carol is the embodiment of it. So whenever I hear anyone say, the system will always win, I'll never be able to succeed, they'll just outwork me, and ultimately I'll just, I'll never have the opportunity to do it. I always point them in the direction of Carol Greenlee and the embodiment of citizen perseverance that she embodies, as well as all of the other Groveland Four family members who have done it as well. So I wanted to introduce you to those Americans who have really used some of the skills of effective citizenship and really helped to dispel some of those myths about effective citizenship. So, when we finish this session today, and nobody knows this better than League of Women Voters meeting members, all of us have a choice. We can agree with the 70% of Americans who believe that officials just will never care about what we think and do nothing, or we can decide to be a Debbie Dooley or a Colleen Kiernan or a Barbara Capetman or a Carol Greenlee and use the skills of effective citizenship to make them listen. I think particularly, and Laura was very helpful in sharing with me kind of the local chapter in the league, some of the priorities you've got going forward. And I think you've got some amazing opportunities to use your effective citizenship skills, which you've already done in the past, to advance some of those priorities. And I just wanted to, before I take questions, I wanted to close out the talk today by just offering a couple of suggestions for some of those priorities and some of those citizenship skills. One of the points that Senator Graham and I emphasize in the book quite a bit is the importance of engaging with local government. That's an area that I just really enjoy coming out of my time at the city of Jacksonville, where, like I said, I had the privilege of working with Carla and Kirby and a bunch of other really talented public servants. But I really encourage people who want to use their citizenship skills to start by engaging at the local level. I think it provides some of the best opportunities for citizen engagement, a lot of avenues, and the work of local government really impacts our lives more directly and more immediately than any other level of government. Just to take one example, look at the community conversation right now about issues like garbage pickup and whether or not we'll resume recycling. Local government has an immediate impact on our lives, and it also provides an incredible opportunity to engage. And especially here in the city of Jacksonville, each of us has officials we directly elect, whether that's a mayor, whether that's constitutional officers, whether that's a district city council person, or one of the 5 at-large city council people who we all elect. So there are a lot of opportunities for engagement. But I'd like to suggest one that's very immediate and ties in to the work you do on voting and democracy. And that's for decades been such an important part of the league's work, and I know particularly right now. But let me just sort of advance to the next screen. Some of you have probably had the opportunity in the past to interact with the Duval County Supervisor of Elections Office. They have a huge need for poll workers. They've had a really difficult time, I think, recruiting people to serve as poll workers. And there's a great need right now. As you know, there's a special city council election going on that will take place. The next election will be, the election day is actually February 22nd, but there'll be a couple of weeks of early voting before that, both in February and then again in August for the primary elections and in November for the state elections, and then again next spring, next March and May for the city elections. There's a huge need for poll workers. It is a very important job to make sure that our elections run smoothly and efficiently, to have outstanding volunteers as poll workers. I talked to Robert recently, and he happened to mention that they're really trying to recruit poll workers because during COVID and for other reasons, it's been challenging. So I've shared Robert's contact information. And in fact, I was in touch with him this morning, and he urged me, please, anybody who'd like to be a poll worker, please have them contact me. Because we're very eager for volunteers to, or for people to play those important roles. He'll have all the details on how it works, but that's one area where I think people can engage immediately in the important work of local and state government, making sure that elections run smoothly going forward. Another citizen engagement tool that I think groups don't often use as much as they should, but there's a unique opportunity to do that in 2022 and 2023, is to educate decision makers before they become decision makers. People who want to serve an elected office will never be more persuadable and more open to suggestion than they are when they are seeking public office, as opposed to once they've in it. Hopefully every public official remains open-minded and open to suggestion, but at this point when they're learning about issues that impact the particular district they want to represent, or particular area they want to represent, is where I think there's some of the best opportunity to help persuade them or educate them on particular issues. So this league chapter has outlined a number of issues. I would encourage you, and obviously only in ways that are consistent with your nonprofit status, but I would encourage you to look for those opportunities to educate not just current office holders, but the list of people who are looking to be state senators or members of the State House of Representatives or members of the city council or mayor in 2022 or 2023, to educate them now while they're seeking office, as opposed to waiting until they come into office. Senator Graham and I have done some speaking to environmental groups, for example, and one of the issues we've talked about is land preservation and the state utilizing its Florida Forever funds to help buy environmentally sensitive lands and preserve them for future generations. And one of the pieces of advice we've always given in those situations is invite these prospective office holders or current office holders out to see some of the pieces of sensitive land you're talking about, because everyone's perspective is never the same. Once they've had a chance to see something like that up close in person, they'll never see the issue in the same way again. So whether it's some of your educational priorities or your healthcare priorities or your priorities as it relates to natural resources, and I saw you're very focused on important issues like septic tanks, trying to sort of interface with public officials before they become public officials, I think can really make a significant difference over the long term. And the last one I wanted to say, and again, something that League of Women Voters members are already very accustomed to, is to look for opportunities for coalition building. There's an old saying that the strength of the wolf is in the pack. And there's a lot of truth to that. If you can assemble a broad coalition, the chances of success are much greater. Great example of that is what we talked about earlier with what Debbie Dooley and Colleen Kiernan did in Georgia, bringing the Tea Party together with the Sierra Club to advance the issue of solar power. I think there are actually some opportunities to do that as soon as this coming legislative session. As soon as I have more details, I will share this with Laura and perhaps see if she wants to circulate that around. but there's some interesting bills that are either have just been introduced or about to be introduced, dealing with issues like clean drinking water in schools around Florida, a way to kind of address some of your both natural resources and healthcare and educational goals all at the same time. So there may be some interesting opportunities as soon as this legislature to address several of your priority issues in the same legislation, and do so in a way that might attract a broad coalition. So as I have more information on that, I'll share with Laura in case she wants to forward it and any of you have an interest in following that. But again, I just wanted to conclude by thanking the League of Women Voters and all of you. I mean, you know, it's always sort of interesting giving a talk on engaged citizenship to the League and similar groups, because you practice this every day in what you do. And so I just wanted to thank you for your commitment and dedication to effective citizenship. Thank you, of course, for having me here today. Thank you for the great work you do in our community. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have before we wrap up today.
Thank you so much. So folks, you can put your questions in the chat. You can raise your hand either on the video or using the digital option at the bottom of your screen. Always takes a minute for somebody to come up with the first question, and then they come fast and furious.
Sure, happy to answer anything.
I'm here. Deb, this is Laura. And I had a question for Mr. Hand, and that is, are you discouraged by the prevalence of social media, what a weight it plays in the decision making at this time?
I think that's a great question, and one that we're going to see more and more of as social media platforms continue to grow and continue to and by the way, I'm just going to unshare my, as they continue to grow and continue to sort of proliferate as a way people communicate. I think there's positives and negatives, and we talk about this some in America, the Owner's Manual. I think the positives of social media is it has given kind of more people a direct platform to be able to voice their views, to kind of share their opinions on issues, to look for new ways and avenues to engage with elected officials. So I think there is some positive, and there have been social media movements that people have used effectively to kind of advance key issues. About 10 years ago, we saw that in North Africa and the Middle East with some of the democracy protests and progress that occurred there. Social media was a big part of that. And as we talk about in the book, there have been other examples on other issues where social media campaigns have been very effective in moving issues up. Just one example from kind of at the dawn of social media, but in 2008, there was a bill proposed that would have created major changes in the state's Bright Futures program. And a student at the University of Florida launched a Facebook page to oppose that, which very quickly had 20,000 followers. And the bill sponsor decided to withdraw the bill. And when asked why, he said, you can't ignore 20,000 people on Facebook. So, I mean, I think in some ways, social media is a tool that you have to incorporate into citizen engagement. I think the concern, of course, is a couple of things. One, because it is unfiltered, because there isn't the filter of the media, there's a lot of information that goes out into social media, which isn't true. And isn't factual. And so a lot of the attention on social media is focused on trying to correct that. And then also, obviously, social media doesn't, in a lot of cases, allow for a thoughtful discussion of issues. It's very hard to have a thoughtful discussion of an issue when you have 280 characters on Twitter. So I think there are pluses and minuses of it. I think what's incumbent on every effective citizen is, obviously not to ignore social media, because that's a way of engaging a lot of elected leaders and opinion leaders, but obviously to do so responsibly and to do so factually and to do so as thoughtfully as possible, so as not to exacerbate some of the challenges of social media.
Thank you. I imagine, Mr. Hand, there's a lot of people who might want to be involved, but might feel like they're not well educated enough on process or don't know where to start. Long time since that high school civics class, if they did even indeed have it. Could you recommend 2 or 3 like great resources you think that people might want to use to educate themselves more about government function?
I would, and at the risk of, definitely want this to be an advertisement, but that's part of the reason we wrote America, the Owner's Manual, was to be able to provide some of that know-how into kind of how people engage with government. What are those opportunities? What are the important steps to take in engaging with government? But I really, to your question, I really think the best place to start is at the local level of government. Not in any way that I'm suggesting that other levels aren't important. They're hugely important. And I know the league spends a good chunk of its time kind of focused on state government issues, as it should. But for someone who's sort of just getting started, I would say, look around your neighborhood and your community and identify the challenges that you want resolved. I mean, in some cases that might be, again, right now in Jacksonville, we're dealing with an issue involving trash collection or recycling collection that has concerned people. Sometimes that's as straightforward as, hey, I want to make sure that my local park is cleaned up or has the amenities that I want. But I think it's always important to start at that level. What is it you want to see different in your own community, or what are the opportunities you'd like to see your community pursue? And then, from that, and once you've formulated, and again, we go through some of the steps in the book, but once you've formulated that problem, you've defined that problem that you want to solve, and you've done the research to make sure you've got all the information you want to advance it. It's a function of finding the level of government, which in this case would be the city of Jacksonville, that has the ability to solve that, and directly engaging with local elected officials to address that problem. Again, we have multiple opportunities here to interface with elected officials because we have a directly elected mayor. We have a directly elected district council person. We have 5 directly elected at-large council people. So just on city council alone, each of us has 6 points of entry into local government. So I just always encourage people, look around you and decide the challenges you want to have solved in your community or the opportunities you want to have realized. Define that problem and then start engaging with your local elected officials to make sure they're focused on responding to your concerns.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and I see that Diane has her hand raised. Go ahead, Diane.
Okay, I did want to say too, I put in the chat, but I didn't realize it was going to Mr. Hand only. Like usually it goes to everyone. So other people may have had that issue. So anyway, so I'm going to read my question. So what do you think about this current trend of politicians to only engage with their supporters? Like they keep very close, private, tightly knit venues, and rather than their actual constituents. And on a local level, do you think the council members maybe should be required to have town hall meetings like twice a year or something, so that they do actually go out? Some of them are very good about it. Same thing with answering emails. Some of them I get great emails from them back, very thoughtful. Others you never, you get nothing.
Well, that's a great question, Diane. Thank you. I think it's exceptionally important for elected officials, once they take office, to have the mindset that they represent everybody in their district or their particular jurisdiction, not just the people who elected them, and to kind of have that approach throughout their time in office, because there's no monopoly on good ideas. You never know where a good idea will come from, and it's important to represent the entire constituency. Not just folks who happen to support you or people who didn't. I just think that's incumbent, sort of a responsibility and a duty of serving in public office. I think a great way to do that is exactly what you suggested, finding ways to directly engage with constituents and hear from them. I know that's been a little more challenging, obviously, in the last 2 years because of COVID and some of the in-person restrictions. Of course, there are ways to do that virtually, kind of like what we're doing here today on Zoom. But I think it's a great idea. And I think some of the best governance comes out of those sorts of kind of interactive engagements with constituents. And I'll give you an example. I wrote another book in 2019, or wrote an update to a book. I didn't write the book, but wrote an update to it. The history of Jacksonville consolidation is called A Quiet Revolution. And I wrote the 50th anniversary update. And as part of that update, covered the period from 2007 to 2019. But the first part of that period was John Payton's second term as mayor, when the city of Jacksonville was going through a major fiscal crisis. In Tallahassee, they had significantly curtailed the amount of revenue that local governments could collect through property taxes. And then the Great Recession of 2008, 2009 happened and had a huge impact on local budgets for years. We certainly felt it in our administration as well. But, you know, Mayor Payton, one of his priorities of his second term was to give Jacksonville some additional fiscal stability. And so he persuaded council to adopt some additional fees to kind of help shift some of the revenue away from just property taxes, and then persuaded council to increase property taxes the last two budgets of his administration. But the way he engaged on that, regardless of how you feel about whether you were for or against the fees or whether you were for or against the property and tax increases, I think it's commendable the way his administration went about that, because they had these budget workshops throughout the community in which they went to different parts of Jacksonville, solicited constituent feedback, heard from them about what some of the priorities would be. And then he personally, or members of his team, went and spoke to every group possible that they could think of. You know, he used to joke that if there were two people gathered, we wanted to talk to them about what we were trying to do as a way to kind of help engage the community. I think that's a really important way for elected officials to make sure they keep their fingers and hands on the pulse of what their constituents are thinking. It's a way of bringing all to City Hall, or bringing City Hall to them. And I think it's really important for elected officials to do that. So a very good way for all of us to use our citizen engagement skills, or our effective citizenship skills, is to encourage our elected officials to do that. And if it's not possible in person because of our public health situation, to use tools like Zoom or Teams or others to be able to give constituents a chance to have that sort of engagement. I think it improves the quality of government to be able to do that. And obviously, I know, you know, people want to be mindful today of safety and making sure that's done in a safe environment. But assuming that can be accomplished, I think it's an incredible tool for elected officials, and one that they all would be very well advised to utilize in their work on behalf of their constituents.
Thank you. Linnell?
Yeah, hey, Mr. Hand, so I want to kind of jump on something that you brought up there. I don't know if everyone is aware, but FSCJ is actually going to hold an event via WebEx online on February 16th. The event is actually called A Strong Mayor, History of Jacksonville's Consolidation. So that's going to be Dr. Daniel Cronbreath that is actually going to do a discussion. So I would encourage everybody to listen in on that, and you can do it safely from your home. But Mr. Hand, I want to continue on something that Diane had brought up. This is something that we see not just here, but in other places. It's not just elected officials. It's when people are running for office. A lot of times we can't even get access to them as future constituents to really have dialogue with them. So there are a number of times where the league reaches out to candidates, asking them to join us for a forum. And, you know, I get some very unique responses or no response at all. But we don't go out there and blast them in public and say, hey, you know, these candidates from one party all said yes, and these candidates said no, because that's not the business that we're in. We just want to facilitate dialogue between voters and what will potentially be a future elected representative. Any idea how to, I don't know, stroke egos or anything else to get people to come out and really talk to future constituents that maybe aren't campaign donors or part of their party?
Well, I'd suggest there's a variety of approaches. One is just simply to keep trying, that perseverance and persistence that we talked about as it relates to Carol Greenlee. And I don't need to tell anyone here that, because I know that's you know, been a value that the league has pursued for years, is to persevere in these situations. But I think you also have to sort of think innovatively. We talked earlier about building coalitions. I think one is, are there other organizations or individuals who may have a better opportunity to get access with those, potential elected officials that you could be working together with on an issue that might help get them in front of your organization as well. We talked about the example earlier, Debbie Dooley and Colleen Kiernan. I mean, the Sierra Club and some solar power advocates at that time were going to have a much tougher time getting in front of the Georgia legislature, for example, which was pretty conservative at the time, than Debbie Dooley and some of her allies in the more kind of conservative wing of this Tea Party coalition could. But because they were able to sort of unite and coalesce, they were able to kind of do this work with elected officials because they understood that in the cases of some elected officials, they were likely to be more responsive to Group A or Person A. In the case of others, likely to be more responsive to other people or organizations. So finding those coalition partners, I think, can be very helpful in that regard. Also, and one of the pieces of advice we give in the book is find out who influences these elected officials and see if you can influence them and persuade them that this is a cause that their ally might want to consider, whether that is a campaign supporter of that potential elected official or others who might have working relationships with them. I think doing that next level of research to figure out who are their allies and trying to, again, help to persuade them about the importance of the issue you're trying to raise is another important way to go about that. So you're absolutely correct. Not always possible to go through the front door in building these relationships, and sometimes you have to look for other entrances to that particular potential public official. And I think coalitions is one way to do that. Really understanding who that potential elected official's allies are and trying to potentially persuade them, and knowing as much as you can about that potential public official, because there might be a particular approach that appeals to them that people wouldn't have thought of. I mean, it's interesting. One of the reasons that Debbie Dooley became very interested in solar power is because two reasons. One, she sort of felt like the sun was a natural resource that she didn't want the government to overly restrict and regulate and not allow people to take advantage of. But she was also very offended because at the time there were some efforts to build some new nuclear power plants in the state of Georgia, and they were going to charge consumers in Georgia in advance and charge them a pretty significant fee to build those. Debbie was kind of anti-monopoly and very concerned about that. So that helped draw her into the solar power issues as well. So thinking innovatively about what are relationships that some of those elected officials have, and maybe there's a way to engage with some of those relationships or other approaches. Maybe there's a different way to think about these issues that would appeal to some of these potential elected officials is also an exercise worth going through.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to move on. I'm going to turn it over to Linnell after she unmutes herself, and she's going to provide us with some announcements. Thank you so much. This has been a great session, very informative, and we really and truly appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to see everybody, and everybody please stay safe.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Hand. You gave us some tools to use, and we will definitely take advantage of what you shared with us. So thank you. I'm going to go through some announcements quite briskly. Deb and I are both on the clock today, so we have to get back on the job. So there's a Vigil for Democracy that's taking place tomorrow evening at 4 p.m. This is down in St. Augustine. We shared the registration link for that on our social media, but it's expected to be at the fort. I'll be there speaking with some other community leaders about the acts that you see there on your screen. You've also probably received action alerts at one time or another from state, national, or from our own local league. We do ask that you reach out to our senators and let them know where you stand on that. We were also scheduled to have an in-person rally at the Capitol for Florida's for Reproductive Freedom. That is going to move to a virtual event out of concern for the spread of Omicron. But there is going to be a virtual event taking place about the impact of abortion bans. That's going to take place January 6th. I'm getting that link so we can put it out. Deb has shared our Facebook and our Instagram accounts there so that you can find that information. We hope you'll join us regardless of what your opinion is on abortion so that you can become more knowledgeable and you can engage on behalf of the league. Next, new member orientation. Right now, we're scheduled to do this at the library on the 22nd at 12:30 in conference room B. Let's be honest, in the event that Omicron really can do what it's doing right now, we may move this back into a virtual event. But right now we are still planning to do it in person, but we are going to stagger out the chairs and we'll encourage mask wearing even for our vaccinated members. So we'll try to be respectful of people's right to freedom and at the same time keep everyone safe. So next. Lobby days for state is still scheduled to be in person in Tallahassee, the 25th and the 26th. If anyone is interested in carpooling or room sharing, please send an email to us so we can start matching people up. I already have my carpooling mate and my room sharing mate. She's on the call today, Sandy. We can put more people in the car if needed. But there's also an option to attend online, a virtual option there. So you should have received an email from state about lobby days. If you have not, please make sure that you reach out to us so we can get that information in front of you so you can complete the registration. Next. Committee meetings. I do believe Linda Mann, our chair for the education committee, has a meeting tomorrow with the state education committee, and then she's going to determine how she moves forward with our local chapter committee. They have a lot of ideas that are brewing right now. If you're interested in being part of that work, please make sure you contact Linda. If you don't have her information, contact us and we'll put you in touch with her. Also, our healthcare committee has been on pause for the last month or so. We are in the process of bringing a couple of new chairs, and as soon as we have that ready, we're going to announce it to the chapter. If you're interested in being part of the healthcare committee, please make sure that you email us. That's our email address right there. And we will put you in touch with the new chairs and you can get involved and help us do some heavy lifting on that in 2022. We are still looking for folks to help out with our club. We're also looking for people to help out with our newsletter, people who are interested in serving on the board. We do have elections coming up in June and our nominating committee will start contacting members probably in the March timeframe. This is vote by mail status. Please make sure, I don't know about y'all, the 12th of every month when I do my buddy check for breast exams for cancer, I also do a voter status check with my county supervisor of elections. We would encourage you to always make sure that you know that your status is updated. Vote 411, Deb here is our Vote 411 extraordinaire for our league, but we do have some opportunities for people to help us gathering data from the supervisors of elections website, help us develop questions for the different candidates for the different races across the 4 counties that we cover. So if you're interested in any of those opportunities, please reach out so that we can add you. There you go, debunf@gmail.com. Please reach out to Deb and take advantage of that opportunity. Next slide. The election coming up, as Mr. Hand said, I'll put a plug in for this. I became a poll worker for the first election. And I'll be training this Friday to become a poll worker for the February election. I believe in leadership by example. We put as part of our program that we would support poll working in each of our 4 counties. So I would encourage you to reach out to your county supervisors and find out how they do poll worker training, when they do it, and make sure that you're registered for that in advance so you can support our elections. Next. Oh my gosh, if you're not already watching the Florida channel for things that are going on in our nation's capital, please make sure that you do. And if you're not getting the league's capital reports, you don't need to be a member of the league to get that. You can track what's going on, what bills we're tracking, and things that are of concern to us. And then obviously you can follow the Florida House and the Florida Senate to make sure you can see what bills are being introduced and where they are at in committee. And I think the next thing that I did not make on here, Diane Main is heading up recruitment for the Dr. Martin Luther King Day Parade, which will take place on the 19th at 10 a.m. We are going to be socially distanced. We will be masked up and we have our banner and we still plan to march in that staggered so that we can keep each other safe and at the same time respect a man whose work we continue to do today, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Having said that, I want to just really thank everybody for showing up today. Obviously, we had a great speaker, and I think that's what brings people out.